So I have 27 minutes to get through a lot of stuff, and I'm going to go ahead and dig in. You guys, if you don't mind, you'll probably have some questions. Go ahead and save them for the end. I have book time after this as well, so I can hang on and answer questions specifically. And we'll do have, of course, we'll have some kind of offer for you at the end as well. But thank you for joining us. I want to start off simply, I guess I could talk about myself for a second. My name is Eric Malzone. I'm the host of this. I'm co-founder with Shannon Teranishi of the Podcast Collective. I have been in the fitness and wellness industry for over 17 years now, basically done everything on the way up through the industry. I started podcasting back in 2017 with the Future of Fitness podcast and then the Fitness Blitz Radio. Collectively, I've done over 800 plus interviews, stopped counting, honestly. I also co-host Athletech Unscripted, launching a new one next year. Can't talk about it yet. So point is, for the last 7.5 years, I've been about knee deep in the world of podcasting. I've seen a lot of pitches. I've pitched a lot of people. I've obviously interviewed a lot of people. So I've noticed some things. That was one of the impetuses for starting the podcast collectives. I just felt that things could be done better, and also we could leverage a network of independent podcasts. So enough about me. I want to talk about podcasting as a category. I actually just talked about this locally here in Whitefish, Montana, about how podcasting is surging, and I don't see it stopping. You guys can read all these statistics here that I have for you, but I think if I was going to throw one thing up here is the US election this year was strongly influenced by the podcast medium. No matter what you guys think about how it ended up, the Joe Rogan Trump interview was, I mean, last time I checked, which was only like a week after it published, it had 44 million views on YouTube. If you guys know the podcast medium, that means that the audio was probably at least that, if not double. So we're talking about 100 million points of consumption of that interview, which is roughly 1/3 of the US population by numbers. Of course, not all everybody was in the US, but that's extremely influential. And I think that's extremely positive for the way that people are consuming podcast media, or media in general. Um, I like to consider it, and I didn't coin this, but if you want to credit me with it, that's great. Authentic media, right? Is I think podcasting and some other forms similar to it. It's just very genuine. It's very authentic, especially in the long form modes, is that it's really hard to hide in a 45 to 2 hour interview. People get to know who you are for the good or the bad, and it's become very genuine, authentic. It seems, not as processed as some of the media that we've been used to consuming in the past. So low barriers to entry, no standard operating procedures, pure creativity. It's a medium that I think is wonderfully, uh, the opportunities are huge in what you can do. It's just your creativity that limits you. The fitness, health, and wellness podcast specifically. So that's the world that we live in here in the Podcast Collective. We are very specific to fitness, health, and wellness industries, but there's a lot of big ones, and I'm sorry if I'm missing any here. These just came off the top of my head. So you have the B2B type podcast, you have the Fit Insider, Athletech Unscripted, the Future of Fitness, myself, and then you have the consumer wellness, which are booming. Huberman Lab, Mind Pump, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. I just interviewed her this week. She just hit 10 million downloads in 2 years. That's incredible. I wish I had numbers like that. Very, very envious, but she deserves it, right? She does great work. So that medium in this particular category is booming as well. I think there's one thing we've proven now in the past few years is there is a very large appetite for consumer health and wellness, and therefore B2B as well. Okay, so now we're going to start getting into why we're actually here is getting into the mind of the podcaster. How do I get on more podcasts? And then know how, once I'm on, how do I actually stand out? I think it's critical that people understand the motivations of the type of podcast. Now, I have three here that I believe are kind of the major categories. There's a whole rainbow or spectrum in between. But there's the elite, right? There's the highly influential, setting the gold standard for us in health and wellness. Not that's Joe Rogan doing health and wellness podcasting, but someone like a Dr. Gabrielle Lyon or a Huberman or a Peter Attia. You name them, you know who they are. These people are an entity in a world within their own, right? That is a rare air that they live in, and they can monetize it in numerous ways. The entrepreneur. A lot live in this section. A lot of the ones that we work with specifically is they've started a podcast. They're leveraging the podcast into things like lead generating for their business, creating partnerships, things like that, promoting the goods and services. So they use the podcast specifically as a vehicle to build their business. And then there's the hobbyist, grassroots podcasters. They infuse a lot of passion, a lot of excitement. Maybe they're not sure where it's going to go yet, but they just love it. And they're a different type of motivation as well. They do it for the love, for the genuine art of the media form. So if you want to get on more podcasts, it's really important that you understand how they monetize or if they monetize. Uh, it just gets you under the hood as far as what is the motivation, how can you tap into that motivation, how you can have a little bit of empathy for their situation so that you can speak their language, understand what motivates them. So number one, there's direct monetization. That's the stuff that you see most of the time or hear most of the time, which is sponsorships, right? AG1, you name it. Actually, AG1 is more of an affiliate deal. So sponsorships, just so people know, since somebody is just paying specifically for branding or a specific call to action. Affiliate deals are generally commission based, where or a mixture of the two. Where something like an AG1, someone like Joe Rogan will get paid for every single time someone uses his discount code. Then there's YouTube ads. That's a whole different universe, but obviously adjacent to it. Pay for play. So this is becoming more popular over the past few years, where if you want to be on a podcast, they'll ask you sometimes for a minimal or hefty fee. I've been quite surprised with the audience numbers that some podcasts have, and then the fees they ask for to be on the actual podcast as a guest. So that's becoming more popular. Not here to debate whether that's a good or bad thing, but it's definitely a way to monetize. And then product sales and whatnot from the actual podcast or whatever their product is. Indirect. So this is kind of the world I live in. A lot of business development, list building, authority building, things like that. And then there's community-based revenues as well from crowdfunding, listener donations, exclusive memberships, content behind a paywall, things like that. The podcast hunt. So a lot of our clients at the podcast collective want to kind of get onto the big ones right away. Fortunately, it doesn't really work like that. I have friends who have been on Joe Rogan. The classic thing is like, no, you don't call Joe Rogan, he calls you, right? So you have to work your way up. And if you're just getting started in the podcast game, it's good to identify ones that are worth your time, but also in the beginning, and we'll talk about this in a second, sometimes it's good just to get reps. Doesn't matter what the audience is or how big it is. You just got to get out there and start getting the reps and start using those to leverage to get to the next level. But here's what I would look for within podcasts is ones that are long runners. They may not have the biggest audiences, but if they've been doing it for a while, someone I'm thinking of on this call is Mike Kurkowski. He's been doing his podcast for a very long time. I actually don't know what Mike's audience numbers are, but I know the type of audience he's looking for. It's a quality audience just by the fact that he's been doing it for a long time. He's very good at what he does. He's been keeping a nice solid cadence, great frequency, guest participation, the quality of guests, things like that. And then separating fact from fiction. So just like Instagram, you can actually buy listeners in podcasting. And I would say if you're looking at something, you're looking at a podcast and maybe they're flaunting specific numbers and it doesn't seem to add up, it may not. So just something to be careful with. Okay. So the art of the podcast pitch. You've heard me talk about motivation quite a bit. Understand what motivates the actual host. What are they doing? Are they driving their business, right? Are they looking to gain more listeners, build their audience? Are they looking for leads through whoever is the guest on their podcast? There's different motivations for each podcaster, and it's really important that you try your best to understand what those are. Understand the host's audience. So this is really critical as well. I mean, we'll show some pitches that I've gotten recently where people don't really understand who I'm talking to. You know, it's obvious, and that's an instant delete or send to a special folder that I have of bad pitches. Lead with value and build a relationship. Just like anything, actually more so than most businesses, the media business is highly relationship driven, especially in podcasting. You know, you'll see at the highest circles of, you know, specific podcasts, people who are at the elite level that seem to make all of the whole circuit, right? Like a Cameron Haynes will all of a sudden be on a Jordan Peterson. Like, how did he get there? That makes no sense. But it's a relationship game. So the more people you know, and you work that relationship and that network over time, the more successful you're going to be in the podcast circuit. Take your time and do the research. I can't emphasize this enough is understand what the podcast is all about, understand the mission, understand the host, understand the business behind it, and take your time. Like this, to get on a specific podcast may take a year if that's what it takes because you're building a relationship, you're listening, maybe you're leaving a review or you're sending them a nice message about it, an interview that they did recently or an episode they released. So it takes a little bit of time. And be responsive too. If you do hear back from somebody, respond right away. Okay, so here's a bad pitch. Kind of fun. Uh, this person says, I'm a dedicated listener to your podcast. No, you're not. And believe so and so would be a captivating guest. Keep going through Soviet era Kazakhstani town and tale of resilience and transformation. This sounds like it's written by ChatGPT. He's passionate about discussing the pluralisms of science and unity of man. Now, if anybody knows what the future of fitness is and the type of people that I talk about and the topics that I cover, it just doesn't fit, doesn't make sense. And it's so super generic. This went right into my bad pitch folder. Here's a better pitch. Cold outreach still, right? He's reaching out on behalf of the company, an AI based personalized supplement manufacturer, right? Squarely, definitely within the type of content that I like to produce. Really enjoyed Brian O'Rourke speaking about the history of tech integration in one of the recent episodes. Once again, shows they took a little bit of time, at least a decent amount of time to understand the Brian O'Rourke and what that podcast was all about. And they want to make a suggestion. And they gave some nice bullet points about topics that they think would be relevant, which I found were good. And at the end of the day, they also sent me free stuff. So that helps a lot too. Just we're all humans and we like free gifts. And I'm not too proud to admit that if someone sends me free stuff, it probably does improve their odds of getting on my podcast. Okay, do the research. Kind of talked about this quite a bit. Listen to the episodes, check out the website, check out their socials, look at all the avenues to really get to know them and who they are, and nailing the contact game. So, in the initial outreach, when you want to talk to them, and I wouldn't suggest actually doing a cold pitch. Always warm it up in some way first, right? The best way to do this, of course, is network introductions by far, hands down. If you know anybody else who's been on their podcast or you know anyone who swims in the same circles, you can go to LinkedIn, you can share, look at, shared networks or do whatever you need to do to network. If you can get an introduction to someone they know, get an introduction from someone they know to them, then that is the best way by far, right? It's business 101. I think anybody who's on here probably understands that. On the consumer podcast side, so the consumer audience side, most likely, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, just find out where they're building their audience on socials. And that's probably the best place to go and engage with them, right? If they have 100 followers on X or Twitter and they're not really there, then they're probably not checking it anyway. On the business to business side, LinkedIn, almost always the best nowadays. So is Twitter. But start with a casual chat, say, hey, I love this episode. Just left a nice review for you. Thanks for doing the work you do, things like that. Or you could hire the podcast collective. Talk about that later. Okay. When you're constructing the actual message, so it's really important, and we have, some templates that we use for this, but it changes every time, is always start with a couple sentences, right? Two, maybe three that are tailored to the host of the show, spotlighting a specific episode or detail that resonated with you. This is the personalized touch, right? It's really important that they understand that you're not wasting their time with some cold, scorched earth method of outreach that becomes really annoying. I mean, if anyone's on LinkedIn nowadays, you can tell immediately when it's just not personalized. It's terrible. It's ruining the platform. But you can also tell when it's very genuine. So on the flip side, if there's genuine communications on that platform or through emails, if it gets to the spam folder, then it just comes across better. You want to be a human, right? Show, don't tell. Beyond the introductions, weave in how you can actually provide value, something unique, something different, something that aligns with what they're trying to do in the mission of the podcast. Unexpected moves. Hey, if you have an address, send a letter. If you have a phone number, pick it up the phone and call. Do things that people don't do anymore. It always stands out. The flywheel effect. Really important concept is that this is the long game, right? Like I said, you can't go from zero to Huberman, right? And without doing anything in between. So it's really important to get the flywheel spinning and then continue it to spinning. What I mean is get on a couple podcasts, use those to leverage to the next podcast and keep it going. We have clients now who were on no podcasts, kind of challenging to place in the beginning. And frankly, we can't stop. Like in Q4, one of our clients, Dan from Push Press, he didn't want to do any more podcasts for the quarter. He was too busy CEOing. So we stopped placements. But the thing is, he started getting so much outreach from people who want to have him on the podcast that flywheel was started and it couldn't stop. So just know that you have to keep it moving. Once you get started, it doesn't take much. Once you're booked. Okay. So here's kind of the core of what we're talking about once you're actually on. I think this is probably the meat of what we're doing here today. Communicate, right? Communicate prior. Offer suggested talking points, but communicate that you are willing to cover whatever that host talks about. You're not driving, they are, right? It's their show. Be very clear on who the audience is and what the mission of the podcast is. These are two critical questions that if you ask, you will immediately impress the host. I guarantee it. Who is your audience? Who are we talking to during this interview? And what is the mission? What is the value that you're trying to give that audience? That presents yourself really well and also gets you in the right mindset for being successful in that podcast. And then also stand the logistics of it. What is the duration, the format? Is it video, audio, streaming? What recording platform did they use? Things like that. Be prepared. So obviously, can't say this enough. Listen, review current episodes to make sure you're topical, informed, and understand the host style and tone. Be a storyteller. Original, when we work with our clients, we always want to have a couple stories in the bank, right? That you can use at any given time, whether it's a podcast or a dinner party or an elevator, right? It's your origin story. How'd you get to where you are? Why is that important to the audience? What resonates with them? Signature stories. Don't tell them percentages or numbers of ways that your business or what you do has improved someone's life. Tell them a story about Susie from accounting who met a personal trainer and used this piece of technology to drastically improve their lives and how it's improving the profits and revenues of that particular gym. There's a difference. You want to wrap in your messaging into stories. And the more you practice these things and always have them in your tool belt, the more valuable they'll become. All that being said, you still need to be malleable, right? Ready to go off script, relax, be cool with it. Don't get frustrated if things don't go the way you want. It's the host show, but you can always try to bring them back. Then obviously be early, have good lighting, have the best microphone you have available. If you really want to get serious, get a nice microphone, get some headphones, those reduce echo. Have a nice environment so the dog's not barking, sirens going, things like that. Control as much as you can within the environment. Turn off all of your notifications, like I forgot to do right before this. So on your computer, on your phone, everything. And also, listen to me when I say this, have a solid call to action. At the end of the podcast, if the host provides an opportunity for you to talk about how to contact you or what website to go to, have one. Don't just say something like, oh, well, you can follow me on Instagram at doodoggy4218. Like, no, that's not a good call to action. Have somewhere that people can go that's really easy and memorable. Remember that most of these people are listening, so they're going to have something that's really easy. So whether it's follow me on LinkedIn or go to pushpress.com/Dan, which was a custom landing page that was created for our client, things like that, where people can really easily remember and go to and have a nice call to action to connect with you. Critically important, 5 minutes after the interview or 2 minutes or whatever you have left. Once that recording stops, that's a really magical point in time. So ask the host, how do you think that went? How can I improve, right? What is the timeline for publishing and how can I help promote? Are there any other podcasts that you think would be good for me? And if so, would you mind recommending me? Flywheel, right? So that period, don't let that slip by. Don't just Bust out of there after the recording, say thanks and bye. Communicate with the host and make sure that you have all these questions, all these things. Make a checklist if you need to. But this is super, super important. And trust me, it will make you stand out. Three biggest mistakes I've seen as a podcast host. So, post and ghost. Shannon came up with that one. I think it's really funny. Um, you spend all this time and energy getting onto your podcast. They spend all this time and energy in recording and publishing, promoting, but you do nothing. You don't help, right? You just say, cool, thank you. The least you can do is post it on social. At best, you can put in part of your newsletter. You can send it to all of your friends, whatever it may be. Let them know that you're with them, you're part of the team, and that's probably a better chance that you'll get back on the show as well. Um, the art of timing, so timing and pacing. I think when you're in the interview, there's no it's equal parts art and science of you don't want to drag on your answers too long so that it takes, some people get very excited. They keep talking, talking, talking. The answer goes too long, and then all of a sudden they ran out of time to talk about all the things they want to talk about, right? So the other point of time is like I've seen it a lot too, or not as much. People just answer really quickly, right? You ask them a question, they're just boom, like that's the answer. Be like, no, extrapolate, give us some deeper meanings into the question. And maybe the question wasn't formulated well. That's okay. It's your job to kind of see where it's going, what the point is, and going in between. I would say on safe bet, most answers to most questions should be between 3 and 5 minutes. So if you can kind of time yourself and practice or review podcasts that you've been on and see how you did, there's always room for improvement with those answers too. So be unforgettable for the wrong reasons. Being late and unprepared. I mean, yeah, just don't don't do that. Bad choices, worst results. So hiring a shitty placement agency. One of the reasons I started the podcast collective is because I saw too many bad agencies. And trust me, when you hire the wrong one, the messaging will be bad. They'll pull scorched earth, which I mean is just generic messaging across the board to multiple podcasts. There's one, if I have enough time, where I actually got in a email battle with this person because they were so rude. And then they somehow found my booking link and got the guest booked in, like I wouldn't catch it. And finally, I just emailed the person, their client, the person who's guest. He was mortified, horrified of what happened. He apologized, and it wasn't a good look for him either. So they're going to hire an agency, just make sure they're respectable and that you're doing it right. So that is the majority of it. And like once again, we just want you guys to realize that at the end of the day, this is a relationship game. It's very important that you take your time, build those relationships, always lead with value. And then if you're interested, if you guys want a free discovery call with me, we'll do it for 30 minutes. We'll come up with a curated hit list, so a target list of 5 podcasts that we think you should go after. Just go ahead and write in here in the messaging hit list, and we'll do that with you. So I think we have a couple minutes. If people have questions, go ahead and drop them in. Happy to answer. Thank you guys. Oh, sorry, Shannon. There we go. Final thing. Contact information for me too as well. You're welcome, Anakam. Thank you for joining. Thanks, Vanessa. Thank you, Ben. Any questions for anybody? Thanks, Jess. Cool. All right.
It's such a good job. There's no questions. Oh, we got
There's one
one.
here. Hey, Bren. If you're transitioning from executive representation from a company to a personal representation, any advice on handling this transition elegantly? Um, yeah, I think the messaging is obviously different, Bren. It becomes less of the value that your company provides in the marketplace, but also what you've learned, how you want to represent, what your specialties are. So it's definitely more of you're transitioning from thought leadership in one span from selling products and goods to thought leadership for yourself as a personal brand. I know those are kind of obscure words, but yeah, hopefully that helps. Hewitt, does thinking outside the box work when pitching a podcast creative pitch? 100% Hewitt, like 1,000%. Being super creative. I mean, it's hard for me to actually keep track of all the pitches I get via my email, so most of them go unread. But if you find unique ways to try a different email or um, find somebody else who's been on a podcast and get an introduction from them, whatever you can do, thinking outside the box is critical. Mike Kurkowski, is it best to send a media kit document with an introduction email message? It depends on your media kit. Really. If it's a good one and it's quality and it makes sense for that particular podcast, then hell yeah. If it doesn't look good, it's a poor representation of your brand, then I would skip it. I've seen some really bad one pagers that look like they were done in the 1980s, and it didn't look good. So I would not recommend it. Now, if it's a high quality one, like the ones that Shannon creates, then yeah, send those all day long.
I think one more thing for Bryn is, when you're transitioning, I think doubling down on that, or like the origin story, like recreating that, because that would be something we would sit down with our clients and be like, okay, we are being represented as an executive at X company, and now you're transitioning into, your own thought leader, or, just setting yourself up as an expert or subject matter expert. I think recreating that origin story and really getting clear, and then also like leveraging whatever your former executive role was, because I think there's a lot of opportunity there and a lot of credibility there to pull from, but completely rechanging your origin story so that people understand what it is you're doing now. I think that could help a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, awesome. I see we have two different sources of questions coming in. Jay Croft asked, I need help in recording intro musicals. Can you help recommendation? Yeah, I still use Danny, Jay. She does a great job for me. Really like the work she does. And then also you asked, how can I speak better, less ums and I still do that a lot. I think the best way to do it is actually go back and listen to yourself and make notes and just simply put a sticky note whenever you do a next interview. It just says, don't do that. I don't think there's any magical way. But listening to
That's a good
yourself,
AI software.
yeah, listening to yourself for sure is can be very enlightening at times. Eric Degatti asked, do you find that a lot of these same rules apply when you're a host approaching potential guests? Yes, absolutely. Very, very similar. I find the more short and authentic my outreach is to them, the better. And the best way to do it is find someone who is a mutual connection and get referred over that way. By far, like 80% of my best, my highest profile guests come from introductions from someone else in my network. Um, Jess, what has been your top three favorite podcast recordings in 2024, guests in or podcasts you've been on? It's funny, I actually have time slotted on Monday, Jess, to release my top five for the year. So I will let you know as soon as I figure that out. But there's been a lot of them, so I have to sit down and really kind of go over it. Um, Kyle, yeah, what's up, Kyle? That's right. You're a recruiter. Kyle says, I'm a recruiter. I don't see a lot of podcasts that have these types of experts on. The disrespect is real. Uh, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. I don't really have a good answer for that. I never really thought about it, but that is funny. Nobody means you any disrespect. We love recruiters. They're critical. Uh,
I think again, it's just like positioning yourself of like what it is you're doing and what problem you're actually solving and what bridge you're actually like trying to create through that medium. I think again,
yeah.
recruiters, yeah, unfortunately have a little bit
Well,
bad because that's the scorched earth, right? And this is something that we're trying to like dissect, because a lot of recruiters use that, I think, strategy and similar to, media agencies. And so maybe if you can debunk that or kind of position yourself as like the anti-recruiter, that would be really
yeah.
cool.
I think there's angles to that, Kyle, in all seriousness. Like I think about, similar to like digital marketing, where there's a good amount of digital marketers. It's a saturated profession for the most part, but it's like, okay, well, how can you take a current trend and talk about how it's changing the landscape of recruitment or job recruitment? Maybe like, how is Gen Z, um, their needs and wants as far as jobs affecting the recruiting market and retention? How is artificial intelligence changing? What is the future of recruiting fitness executives? Why are so many fitness industry CEOs outsourced from different industries and brought in. Why aren't we creating our own CEOs within the industry? So I think you take like what you're doing as a recruiter, but finding new and relevant topics within that sphere to help create meaty topics that are a hook for the host.
Yeah,
That
it's
would
like
be
that divorce lawyer guy that keeps going around. He's like, I've done like 1,000 divorces, but here's what I've learned. You could be like, I've done
yeah, totally.
1,000 interviews with different people, in the fitness, wellness, or health industry or whatever industry you're recruiting from, and this is what I've learned,
Yeah.
right? It's like you're taking everything that you've been exposed to because you've been exposed to way more than anybody else ever had, but it's the angle of like, this is what I've learned.
Yeah, yeah. Be the antagonist. Exactly.
Totally.
Exactly, Bryn. I love it. Jay Croft, how can I boost my star appeal with podcast hosts who want big names or at least bigger than mine? Um, I don't
Come
know
on
if I
over.
have a good answer for that, buddy. I think when I figure it out, I'll probably be the first one to apply it, but I think it just takes time. I think you just, you do the work, right? Like Huberman didn't come out of,
I mean,
didn't just
article though
start.
too for Jay, just because I met Jay as well. So
Oh
I'm
yeah, yeah, you know
thinking
Jay.
like,
Yep.
yeah, so I'm thinking Jay, like honestly, like starting to publish like LinkedIn articles, starting to like position yourself of like, your anti-aging podcast and like some data that you might have come across, or, I know you're a writer as well. So it's like I think publishing more content it can get you a lot more credibility. And then leading with that, right? Leading with that content that you've published. You're already a writer. So yeah, just doing it on different platforms like a LinkedIn or something a little bit more of a platform, I think would definitely be a good leader for you.
And I think the other thing, and I'm just as guilty as anybody else, is you have to ask.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah, some people just don't ask. They wait for the call to come to them. And sometimes a lot of times you have to go out there and be very active with it. Um, Ben says, I've been published so many times and have gotten a ton of podcast interviews through this. Great point. Yeah, there you go. SEO is real too. People will Google your name. That's the first thing they'll do.
Mhm.
And the more that's out there on you, the better impression they'll get.
Yeah, definitely.
These are great questions.
Be the antagonist. I like
Yeah, totally.
it. Awesome. Well, we went over only 6 minutes. That's great for us.
Yeah, it is.
And if there's any other questions, Eric, y'all can just type in the chat and we can reach out to you. So I think we'll probably close this out. And if you want any access to the presentation, just let us know and we can send it your way.
Yeah. Yeah, Jay, it's okay that you were late.
That
This
was
will go down. This
actually
will go down your
top
quarterly report.
three. That was one of our top three. What not to do.
Yeah, Menachem, we'll be putting this recording on our YouTube because Shannon's savvy like that. Right on. All right, you guys. Thank you so much for joining us. This was a lot of fun. And if you need anything in particular, you know where to reach us.